All right, I think we'll start. Hello and welcome everyone to the latest PediaTrust Q&A Ask the Pediatrician webinar, Sun and Fun, Masks and Vax. My name is Ruben Rucoba. I'm the Medical Director for PediaTrust and your host for tonight's session. Our panel tonight includes, and if you can, give a little wave so we can put a face to a name, Dr. David Saltzman, pediatrician at Lakeshore Pediatrics, with offices in Libertyville, Barrington, and Lake Forest. Dr. Ann Giese, pediatrician at Elm Street Pediatrics in Winnetka, and Dr. Claire Cree, pediatrician at Wheaton Pediatrics, with offices in Wheaton and Batavia. Our session tonight will be just about an hour long. We're going to wrap up around 7, and as you heard, it will be recorded. We'll be sending an email out to everyone who registered for this event with a link to the recording in the next few days. We've had questions coming in for the past few weeks, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. But for those of you watching tonight, you can also submit questions either through the chat function on the Zoom call or through Facebook Live. And we'll try to get to some of those as well. Dr. Saltzman, let's start with you. You recently wrote a blog about summer safety that can be found at our website, PediaTrust.com. And you said that you spent a lot of time in or on the water, both when your children were younger and even now. Swimming and boating are great summer activities, we know, but they can also be dangerous, especially for little ones. What helpful advice can you give to those in the audience to keep water activities safe for our families?
Be happy to talk about that. So I usually tell parents that they are the two people that should watch their children. Interestingly, there was a pediatrician on TV last spring after like the first warm day, and she said an adult should be assigned to the children. I take issue with that because I do think parents watch their kids better than any other adult, including aunts and uncles, grandparents, babysitters, and so forth. And that's not just when you're in water, that's when you're near water, because unfortunately kids wander and they could wind up finding water when you're not even planning to be in the water. If there's a good number of kids and the ratio of children to adults probably is more than 2 to 1, you might want to recruit someone to help you. There are times when you have to get someone out of the water and someone's still in the water. And I personally have pulled other people's children out of the water only a few times. And as I've always said, these people weren't being negligent. They were just tending to another child. I mean, it's hard to juggle many kids when there's water involved. And it's just really important to keep a very close eye on them. I explain to parents it's really fun to swim with your kids and to see them learn and become more confident. And sort of the bottom line is it's a lifesaver. And parents can model these behaviors by, especially parents that don't know how to swim. I say this is an opportunity for you to learn how to swim with your child.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, Dr. Saltzman, what about cultural barriers to learning how to swim? What have you seen in practice?
Well, unfortunately, there are generational cultural barriers. There's certain families, certain cultures that say they don't swim. They're not in the water. And the downside of that is that people that don't swim have a greater chance of drowning and having terrible accidents when you're in or near water. A parent who can't swim is not going to be able to help their child if their child is in danger. Another issue is ability to get to water to learn how to swim. Not everybody is somewhere where there's swimming lessons available or where there's swimmable water available. YMCAs are a great help. Park districts are a great help. If you're, belong to a community pool, that's where I learned how to swim. I think I learned how to swim in 32-degree water in the community pool where I grew up. And I didn't love it, but I did learn how to swim, and I still swim. So it's a great opportunity to talk about this as a family thing, and for people who have these generational fears of, or just these thoughts that we as our family, we don't do water. I really try and convince them that needs to end for the sake of their children. It's a great gift to give your children this comfortability, this confidence in water.
You're right. It can be a matter of life and death. Thank you for that reminder. And as a last follow-up, switching gears here, not about the safety of the water, but what about the safety of pools and splash pads regarding COVID exposure?
Well, again, I would always say, I think most people agree that outdoor activities are much safer than indoor activities. And I think it depends on a person's level of comfortability. I belong to a health club and swim, and there are other people in the pool. I'm comfortable with that. I've been vaccinated. That certainly helps me be more comfortable with that. I think everybody's got a different level of comfortability, but when patients ask me, I'm fine with them going to pools and splash pads. I think my greatest concern is not COVID, but more so water safety.
Thank you. Yeah, it puts it in perspective. All right, let's switch gears here. Dr. Giese, this next question is for you. One parent asked, is DEET okay for my 3-year-old child? What's your answer? And what else can you tell us about insect repellents?
All right. So I happen to have done all of my pediatric training in Minnesota, where they joke that the state bird is the mosquito. So there was a lot of DEET that used all through residency, and then even in my oldest child. So definitely DEET is safe for children. It is the most effective and best insect repellent to use if you're trying to prevent Lyme disease and West Nile, which are really, there's definitely the convenience factor of mosquito bites and trying to prevent those, but really what we're trying to prevent are the insect-borne illnesses. So for sure, if you're using DEET, you do want to use it wrists, ankles. You want to try to cover your child with as much clothing, especially if they're 3, and really minimize that DEET exposure. But you do want to use it in the areas where they would where ticks could potentially crawl under their clothes, things like that, especially if you're really going to be like out hiking in the woods. If this is really just for sort of like suburban community, mosquitoes, go with one of the family-friendly bug sprays. Many of them work very well. There are some of the natural ones that actually work quite well just for repelling mosquitoes. Other things you can do in terms of insect repellent that are not actually bug sprays or chemical things, really removing all the standing water. So even like little splash pads or water tables in your backyard, making sure that there aren't standing puddles around. Those are all breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which do transmit West Nile. Excuse me. And if you live in an area with ticks, really making sure that you're doing tick checks on your children and check. This is something, again, that I've done on my kids for years. And as we look at the migration of Lyme disease, we do see that it's been moving. It was kind of northwestern Wisconsin and the full state of Minnesota. It's definitely the Lyme prevalence has been creeping further and further south to the point where it's almost at Lake Geneva at this point. So really, if you're at a cabin in Wisconsin, you do want to be making sure that you're doing tick checks on your kids, that if you find any, you're getting them off as soon as possible, because the longer they're on, the more likely they are to transmit disease. And again, avoiding hands, anything that's going to go in the kid's mouth, and really making sure that they get a nice, as soon as you're inside and done for the day, they get bathed and the DEET comes off.
Thank you. Dr. Creed, this next question is for you. And we got several variations on this question, so I know it's a popular one. Can my kids play with other kids outside around mass, less than 6 feet apart? And a specific question, can my unvaccinated 9-year-old have a play date outside with another unvaccinated 9-year-old without a mask?
And I'm sorry, I just started to lose my voice right before the webinar, so I hope everybody can still hear me. So I'm going to say overall, my answer would be yes for most of these situations. So playing outdoors is really the best way to go. There's more ventilation outside. It's really a safer place to play, and you're less likely to spread disease outdoors. Kids have a lot more freedom if they're going to be playing outside, and so there's a lot of good safe options. It's always good to have like fewer number of households involved. So as you increase the number of households and the number of people and the amount of crowding, that's when you're going to increase your risk of spreading COVID. And then anytime you're indoors, that's just decreasing the ventilation. So I think kids are pretty fun and creative and can do a good job distancing outside and still having fun and playing together. So I think there's a lot of good options for them outside.
Thanks, Claire. And as a follow-up, we got a question. I'm going to send this one to Dr. Giese. Is mineral sunscreen a safer choice for kids?
Mineral sunscreen is fantastic. I recommend it all the time. It is a safer choice in terms of the makeup of it. It's actually a skin barrier that reflects the sun as opposed to a chemical sunscreen that's absorbed into your skin. So it is kind of hard to wash off. It does stay on in the water quite well. It's sometimes hard to get on to little kids because you really do have to make sure that you're rubbing it and spreading it around really well. But it is an excellent option. I specifically recommend it for anybody whose child has eczema, as it tends to be less irritating to eczema and it doesn't create flare-ups.
Thank you. So I'd like each of you to answer this next question. We'll start with Dr. Saltzman, go around the horn. What are safe activities this summer concerning COVID? Is it safe for kids to be with vaccinated kids unmasked? Can they play with unvaccinated kids unmasked? And I guess also what might be some dangerous activities or less safe activities, even outside? Dr. Saltzman, what do you think?
Well, I think I want to mirror some of the things that Dr. Creed said. Outdoors, I'm pretty much okay with many activities. So I have a lot of boys that like to play basketball, and I just tell them, play basketball, but don't be inside each other's shirt. It's okay if you're not playing the best defense in the world. That's or wrestling with each other where you're lying on top of each other. I think sports where you're distanced just by virtue of throwing something to each other is something I've been telling kids probably since last fall, when children want to go outside and play frisbee or play catch or shoot hoops. I'm not worried at all about transmission of COVID by touching things like balls and frisbees and bats. I'm not concerned about that at all. Most of the organized sports that have existed and continue to hopefully thrive outside in the summer, I'm fine with. Some of the sports that I think get a little tricky, it's funny, hockey, if anyone ever is a big hockey fan or has a child or has played hockey themselves, there's a lot of chaos on the bench. And I had a boy who was sick with a different virus recently, and I said, you guys are really good about not sharing each other's water bottle, right? And he gave me a big smirk of an answer. And his mom said, oh, they never drink out of each other's water bottles. And he gave me a really cute smirk. So obviously, if there's oral contact with the type of bottles kids bring to sporting events with water, that they should be a little bit more careful. I mean, a lot bit more careful with that than they've been in the past. But most outdoor sports, I'm absolutely fine with. I think that we got to get kids back together, and I think playing your sports and being active is good on so many levels, socially and for your cardiovascular health. And big fan of people doing things outside.
Great. Dr. Creed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think some of my favorite things to play outside when we were younger could all be safe options. Like we like to play kick the can and kickball. Hide and seek is a good one. Playing like hopscotch and playing with chalk. You can spread out. One game we used to play was called Sardines, and that might be on a not COVID safe list because you have to pack into a small space when you find the person. And for like baseball and softball, one thing to consider is not like packing in the dugout. I think that's something to remember too, to spread out. And then if you're doing carpools, try to keep the windows down when you're driving places.
Good to know we all went to medical school so we can discuss the finer points of Red Rover. But Dr. Giese, do you have any suggestions about safe activities or unsafe activities?
Sure. again, so I'm in a unique position at this point where I have one fully vaccinated child and one unvaccinated child. And so we have kept our gatherings quite small. So we've limited it to one other family, or all with all vaccinated adults. Again, and kept everything outside. We have started doing more intergenerational gatherings, so grandparents and things like that coming over. And as long as everybody's outside, and I've had my unvaccinated child unmasked, if I know everybody else is vaccinated. If we go inside, he masks, as do all of the rest of us, just because of his comfort level. So for those families who have these COVID babies who are kind of like looking like, hey, can we start to get together with aunts and uncles and grandparents and things like that? I do think it's safe for the kids to be around them outside, again, better than inside. We've started some really fun new family traditions that I think will stick well past COVID. We've done outdoor movie nights and backyard camping, which have been really fun. So we've had cousins sleep over in a separate tent, and there's been a lot of fun things that we've done in addition to many hours of sports.
Great. And on that note, there was another question that came to us in the chat. I'm gonna tell you what the question is, then I'll have a comment about safe activities. And one of the three of you can think about how to answer this question, and I'll call on you in just a second. Is it safe for my 6-month-old and 3-year-old to be held at family gatherings outside by vaccinated adults who are unmasked? But before we get to that, I just want to say there are some less safe activities. I don't want to call them unsafe, but less safe, that we know spreads the virus more. Eating, singing, talking loud, shouting, cheering. Some of that stuff is done at camps where your kids go to for the summer. Some of that is done when you just, around a campfire. It's just natural sort of to break out in song. So if you're going to do that this summer, my suggestion is to make sure that even, if you're not masked, that you're at least 6 feet apart, and perhaps a little bit further than that even, just because we know that's an activity that does spread the germs much more efficiently than simply being around somebody and talking. All right, who wants to answer this question about holding younger children by vaccinated adults who are unmasked at family gatherings outside?
I'll grab that.
You look like you're ready to answer that question.
I mean, I've been to some family gatherings where there are some young kids, and I would have no problems with being the vaccinated person holding young kids. I do it every day at my job, and that's inside. So I'm very comfortable with that. Okay, that good. I expected as much. A fairly simple answer. I just wanted to verify that for all of our audience. The vaccines work. We know they work. They're safe. They're effective. So let's act like they are. And sure, a vaccinated adult can pick up those little kids outside unmasked. No problems. And even inside, as Dr. Saltzman said. Some of them you just have to pick up because they're too darn cute not to. Right. So, Dr. Saltzman, what can you tell us about sunscreen? We know it's important this time of year, and what's important to know about it? Well, as you said about vaccines working, sunscreen works. It works if it's applied well. As far as applying it on our children, so one of the things that does make little kids very cute is they have big cheeks. And it's funny, if you look at a child's face from their forehead down, their cheeks sometimes stick out further than their noses do. Like I get a lot of sun on my nose because I don't have baby cheeks. So you do want to protect their cheeks with sunscreen, but you could only get sunscreen so close to someone's eye, because if they rub it and get it in their eye, it's pretty irritating. Not as bad as soap, but pretty close. So bucket hats are a good idea. Again, not baseball hats, because tops of ears catch a lot of sun and backs of necks catch a lot of sun with baseball hats. I fish a lot. I have a bucket hat. It's not a big one, it's an adult one. And let's see what else. Clothing is very effective too in preventing sunburns. And I think the people that invented these swimming clothes for kids that I think come from like rash guards from the surfing community should win some sort of award. Again, having spent a lot of time on beaches and around pools in my life, it's comical how many kids run away from their parents when they're supposed to be getting sunscreen applied. We, again, should model these behaviors. We should wear sunglasses. We should wear hats. We should have sunscreen on. And I think the hardest thing that I have and many people have with sunscreen is remembering to reapply it. It gets washed off with sweat, regardless of what the bottle says. It gets washed off when you come in and out of water and you're drying yourself off. If you're playing, getting near another person, if you're digging in sand, remembering to reapply it, I think is very, very, very important. About every 2.5.
Right. And I think it's very important, other steps like I think you mentioned the clothes that have, sunscreen built into them, very helpful. It really can be, protective for your kids and for you.
They're a lot more comfortable these days than a cotton t-shirt, which was all there was when I was a child. These clothes, they hug your body more. They're not as baggy and they don't bother you as much when you're in the water.
So as a follow-up to the sunscreen question, I'm going to go back to you, Dr. Giese, our queen of insect repellent. One mom wants to know, is the combination sunscreen insect repellent a good idea for my school-age children?
So I think that just depends on what you're doing. Sunscreen and bug spray both work. Typically at the beach and the pool, there aren't that many bugs, so you probably don't need both. In the woods, sometimes, you can get away with minimal sunscreen just on your face and hands because it's shadier. So, know where you're going, know what your activity is and which one is going to be sort of the main use for the day. Also, I guess one thing I forgot to say earlier is there is a spray. It's called permethrin spray. And it's an insect repellent that you can spray onto your clothing or your children's clothing. And that it works beautifully. And I think it lasts like 7 or 8 washes, and it's typically widely available. Permethrin spray goes right onto your clothes. And so then your bug spray is not on, if you're worried about mixing chemicals or having too many things on your child or being able to get them all covered in both, you can do the sun clothes and the bug spray, or you can do the bug repellent clothing and the sunscreen. And then that simplifies it a little bit.
Right. And I would just reiterate what Dr. Giese said. You usually don't need both of them at the same time. When the sun is at its peak, there's usually not a lot of bugs. When the bugs are out early morning, late in the evening, after dark, obviously you don't need the sunscreen. So probably best to apply 2 different things rather than one with the combination. All right, Dr. Creed, we know that biking is another favorite summertime activity, but what precautions should families take when biking or using other wheeled devices like skateboards, roller skates, roller blades?
Yeah, so riding bikes is a really fun way to get some exercise, a great summer activity and a good COVID safe activity. One of the number one things to remember is to always wear a helmet. So and many injuries occur right on the driveway or the sidewalk, not just on the street. So parents should set a good example and always wear a helmet themselves. And then don't forget about teenagers. So teenagers report a really high rate of never or rarely wearing their helmets. So let's really do a good job of getting our teens to keep up with this safety habit. And then when you're choosing a helmet, look for the CPSC label to make sure that it's meeting safety standards. Other things to remember would be that any helmet that was involved in a fall or an accident and had significant impact on it, that it's leaving a scratch, it's recommended to discard a helmet after it's been in an accident. And then those that are older than 5 years should be replaced due to possible product deterioration. Some tips for proper fit: it should be level on the head and covers the forehead, not tipped forward or backwards. You can kind of put 2 fingers above your between the eyebrows and the edge of the helmet as a tip, and then the straps on the side should make kind of a V shape below each ear, and then you can you should be able to safely, easily fit like 2 fingers between the chin strap and your chin, but it should be snug on the head. If you like open your mouth, it should kind of pull the helmet forward, but it shouldn't be jostling around. And you can use the padding to make sure that it's a good snug fit. Other things to remember: choose a bike that's the right size. So it's dangerous for kids to be riding an oversized bike. So try to avoid buying a bike that they'll like grow into. And it's good to have your kid try out the bikes with you, rather than trying to surprise them with one that might not be the right size. Other things to remember: don't push your kid to ride the 2-wheeler until they're ready. You can use the training wheels first, or the balance bike. Foot brakes are important for younger kids to use. It requires more coordination to use the hand brakes, so stick with the foot brakes first. And the safest places to ride would be bike paths, parks, uncrowded areas. Younger kids can stick to the sidewalk, and then when kids are older and mature enough, then they'll need to learn to ride on the street. They should learn the rules of the road. Riding with traffic rather than against traffic is recommended. It can distract the drivers if you're riding against traffic. And kids should learn the hand signals for turning. Never ride at dark. Don't assume that like the reflective clothing would keep them safe. Don't let your kids ride at dark. And then no earphones or headphones when riding your bike. Kids shouldn't be carrying things, especially their phone and electronics, because those things are distracting. And avoid like the trick riding and doubling up on the seats. And then I mostly talked about bikes, but some other tips for like skateboarding, rollerblading, or wrist guards are important. You don't want to fall and end up like breaking both of your wrists. So those are some safety tips, but we'll include the bike safety on our webinar link to read.
Yes, and in the chat, you can see Anjali, our wizard behind the scenes tonight, put up 2 links, one about bike helmets and one about choosing the right bicycle for your child. So, you can certainly click on those right now. They'll take you to that website and you can bookmark that for later. Okay, we got a question sent in from one of our audience members, and it's related to the question that was asked about the 6-month-old. Would there be any different advice you would give regarding a newborn in terms of who can hold the baby and all that stuff? Dr. Giese, what do you think? Do you have any different advice for a newborn as opposed to, say, a 6-month-old?
I guess if we're talking newborn, under 4 weeks, I do say that you should really limit your, I guess, circle. And I don't recommend under 4 weeks that you take your baby to a gathering and pass them around, because any fever in a baby under 28 days is considered a medical emergency, and you would end up in the ER, and it would be bad. So for your own sanity, if it's like grandparents at a family gathering who are helping you out, totally go for it. Everybody needs 4 or 5 extra arms when they have a newborn, but definitely not a passing around event. But that's just my standard newborn advice. It's not specific to COVID. That was actually pre-COVID advice that I gave to people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're all nodding our heads, knowing that the baby in that first 4 weeks of life, very fragile in terms of getting infections. So you just want to be very careful about handing them off to anybody, excuse me, COVID or not. It's really
or not.
All right. So we're all very grateful for the warmth that summer brings here after a long winter in Chicago, but the heat can also be dangerous. What advice do you have for families spending time outside in the heat, Dr. Saltzman?
Oh boy, this is a good one. So things that are hot. Well, first of all, when we're hot, we need to sweat. And in order to sweat, we need to be well hydrated. So drinking, parents drinking water, modeling that water's okay. It doesn't have to be something sweet or flavored. getting children used to drinking water. Don't wait for them to say they're thirsty. If anyone's ever done any, like big time dry nature involvement, you don't wait till you're thirsty. You drink about every half hour when you're out, especially a dry heat. I like to talk about things that are hot and give some warnings. So the obvious things like barbecues, chimeneas, and fire pits, we have to be very careful with our children. Cars get incredibly hot, and I caution people to give the car more time to cool off before you get in a car with small children, certainly longer than it would be if I were by myself. I would turn on the air conditioning, open up the windows, and go, because I'm in a rush always. But with our kids, we really shouldn't be in a rush. We should take some time and let things cool off. Putting a white towel or blanket over a car seat or booster seat was a suggestion made to me many years ago by a patient's mom. I probably said that thousands of times to other people. I think that's really bright because buckles on car seats can get rather hot. At parks, I think you can probably fry an egg on a metal slide in a park around here in the summer. Slides can get very hot, swings can get hot, the chains on swings can get hot. So trying to touch these things before, if you can beat your kids to it before they get on these devices. Again, wearing loose clothing, light color clothing mostly, but I've just heard something recently about, it was just on the news, but dark color clothing, but it's clothing that's going to keep the sun off your skin. Again, worrying about sunburn, hats. But again, it's important for us as adults to model these behaviors. Pretty much that applies to everything we've talked about so far today. Uh-oh.
Oh, I think it's Ruben muted.
Ruben, you're muted.
You'd think after about 15 months you would figure this out, right?
I think that's something I would do.
Right, exactly.
You're not supposed to agree with that.
We got a question from one of our audience members, and the question is going to be directed at Dr. Creed. I'm just going to read this to you. I'm due to have a baby in October. I'm planning on sending him to daycare in January, prime flu season, RSV, COVID, a lot of things to worry about, obviously. What are your thoughts on this? And I know this is a very personal decision that everybody has to make on their own, but she wonders maybe go a nanny route to get through flu season. So, what can you tell that mom, Dr. Creed?
Yeah, so it's kind of a hard decision for all parents. There's not really a right or wrong answer. Kind of whatever works best for your family. Baby would at least be, I'm guessing like 3 or 4 months at that point. We definitely had the issue come up where parents were maybe trying to avoid daycare and had a nanny instead, but then the nanny got COVID. And so there's not like one way to avoid it altogether. The less exposure, the less likely there will be to be other viruses going around. But babies have been going to daycare for a long time, and it has a lot of benefits too. And so just remembering that like hand washing and sanitizing surfaces and staying home when you're sick are all important things to remember. But I think like either way, either decision, either choice will end up working. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add there.
The only other thing I would add is, there's no reason why you have to make a decision now. The world is going to look a lot different, I think, in January than it does now. The age at which people can get vaccinated is going to go down. I don't think it'll be down to 6 months by then, but there's a chance. It'll certainly be down probably to, around 5 or so by then. And it may be lower. So again, the world will probably look a little different than it does right now, and that may influence your decision as well. But Dr. Creed is right. You got to make a decision with the information you have at that time. And, there's really no wrong way to do it. You just have to, think about it and discuss it and do some investigating about the place. If you do use either a nanny or a daycare, make sure that the people who are, taking care of your child are at least vaccinated. That's, the safest thing. And not just against COVID, but against flu. and, you know, all the other things that they can pass on. All right. Speaking of the COVID vaccine, we get a lot of questions about that. And over the last few weeks, we've had a lot of questions about the COVID vaccine, and some tonight about the very youngest of our patients, those 6 years and younger. Dr. Giese, what can you tell us about the COVID vaccine in that age group? Any idea when the vaccine will be approved, and is testing being done on the vaccine in that age group? Is it going to be safe?
So the early safety data on the vaccine in kids is excellent. And that's, at this point, we only have that down to age 12. The trials are still going on for kids, and I believe they're split up 6 to 12 and then 6 and under. Our office did have a meeting yesterday with an infectious disease physician from Lurie, who was saying that the trials in the 6 and under group are not going as quickly as both Pfizer and Moderna anticipated, specifically the Lurie trial, because they are really trying to hone in on dosing for that age group. So I know at one point this spring, I was super hopeful that maybe we'd be down to 6 by late summer, early fall. That looks like it's probably still on track, but more for early fall than late summer, according to the report we got this week. But it really was looking a little bit more like the younger kids might be even into early 2022. I think the good news is we haven't seen a lot of COVID in the under 6 age group. They don't seem to transmit it as much. They don't necessarily have the maybe strength to make the respiratory droplets that transmit it, but obviously things have been changing. So it's a work in progress, but there are a lot of people out there working really hard on this, and the safety, like I said, down to 12 is excellent, and the efficacy is unbelievable. And this vaccine technology is awesome. So hopefully we'll get it in those little guys soon.
Thank you. Dr. Creed, one mom wonders, are the vaccines effective on those with food allergies? I've heard they're not as effective on those with immune system issues. What do you tell that mother?
Yeah, so the vaccines are very safe and effective in people with food allergies. So there's not really a reason that we should assume that kids with food allergies would have a decreased response to the vaccine. I wouldn't really consider kids with food allergies to be in the category of immunocompromised. We do know that individuals with an immunocompromised condition should definitely still receive the COVID vaccine, but they might, in certain conditions, they might have some decreased protection from the vaccine. Most of our patients wouldn't fall into this category. Some specific examples would be patients getting chemotherapy for cancer, specific blood cancers, patients that have had stem cell or solid organ transplants, untreated HIV, specific combined primary immunodeficiency disorders, and then specific immunosuppressive medications. One example that our patients might recognize would be prednisone, but you really have to be on a high dose and for at least 14 days to for it to be considered in that like immunocompromising category. So overall, I would say a lot of our patients wouldn't fall into that category, but even if you do, you should definitely still get the vaccine. And they are looking into studies to, if you get maybe a third dose, you might see more of a response. But there's still a lot of unknowns in that category. And there's not recommendations to get like antibody testing after vaccination or things like that. But definitely talk to your doctor or your child specialist if you have a more specific question about that topic, or let us know here if you do.
That's good advice. Thank you, Dr. Creed. In fact, I'd like all of you to weigh in on this next question again. One parent asked a very open question, quote, I want all the facts on COVID vaccines for 12-year-olds and expectations for 10-year-olds, unquote. Well, we may not be able to give you all of the facts, as we did on our previous webinar on vaccines, which you can find on YouTube, and hopefully that will be coming out. We'll send you the link to that YouTube recording when we send out the recording for this one. And we're planning on having another vaccine webinar in August before school starts. But for now, what are the important facts regarding vaccines in 12-year-olds and older? Dr. Saltzman, let's start with you.
So children obviously hang around other children. They're also part of families. Every family has their own issues with regard to people who are either A, getting or B, not getting vaccines. There are grandparents who may not be that healthy. So every family, I would say, treats us individually. And I think what we have to realize about children is, I think we would all agree that we don't see a lot of young kids in that age group getting very sick from COVID. They're not tremendous transmitters of the disease, but it can happen. So like I've read in so many books, like, we don't live in bubbles. We live with, in many different groups, and whether it's school or sports teams or families, children get transferred. That we live these diverse lives where we're in all these different circles of people. And I just think in general, there's no reason to think that these vaccines won't be effective in these young kids, but they're pretty diverse. They run in a lot of different circles, which I think make it, a great idea to get young children vaccinated. Dr.
Creed?
One other thing I wanted to bring up is this virus can mutate, and variants can pop up, and so the more patients that we can get vaccinated and the more coverage we can get first, then the less of a chance the virus has to mutate, and the less of a chance that it will mutate into something that won't be covered as well. So it's really important to try to get vaccinated as soon as you can, rather than waiting.
Dr. Giese, anything to add?
Just a couple things. So we in our practice have seen a large number of 12 to 16-year-olds vaccinated and have had minimal side effects within our practice cohort. And I know that because I happened to be on call for the 48 hours, which after most of them received their second dose. And there were very, very few issues. That's point number one for the 12 to 16-year-olds. For the 10-year-olds, again, hopefully fall. And I think the other thing to think about is really viruses can do weird things. And I know there's always, people are always concerned about vaccines, and it might just be the fact that I'm a doctor. But I typically am way more worried about viruses in my kids than I am about any vaccines. Vaccines are tested, viruses are not. Viruses can mutate, viruses do weird things. So my goal as a parent and as a pediatrician is always to do the best I can to protect my own children and my patients from getting those viruses in the first place.
The only thing I would add is that it's a bit of a myth that COVID really doesn't affect younger children or children even in the pre-adolescent years. Everybody says, oh, why should I vaccinate my kids? They'll just get it. It's like a cold, isn't it? And the answer is no, it can still kill. In fact, many of the diseases that we vaccinate against kill far fewer than COVID has over the last year. From March of 2020 to March of 2021, over 330 kids died in the United States from COVID. Pre-vaccine, about 50 to 100 kids would die every year from chickenpox. About 3 to 10 from hepatitis A, um, a couple dozen from some of the other viruses like pertussis, rubella. We vaccinate against all of those things. So why wouldn't we want to vaccinate against something that's even more dangerous to our kids? So I'll just leave you with that thought. However, I do recognize that there's been a lot of publicity lately about the vaccine and some of its side effects, and we need to address that. So there was a question asking us to comment on the reports of myocarditis, or heart inflammation, that has been linked to some of the vaccine with COVID. And Dr. Giese, can you respond to that question?
Sure. So again, I think that is actually a great specific example of a case in which the virus created much more of a problem with myocarditis in that preteen age group than the vaccine does. And another point that was brought up yesterday in a conversation with Flurry Infectious Disease is the virus actually causes a true myocarditis. And this is, again, a little bit, the vaccine causes a reaction. So myocarditis itself can be very serious. What the vaccine has been documented as causing is a perimyocarditis, which has less risk for long-standing consequences and is not anything that people have had to be hospitalized for or have, concerns for long-standing issues. That said, with the true viral myocarditis that has happened with the COVID virus, there is long-term damage that has happened that's very well documented, cardiac long-term damage.
Right. So to reiterate, it's the disease that causes a lot of problems.
Right.
Much more
not the vaccine.
Right. No, you did. It's much more. You're much more likely to get myocarditis from the disease than you are to get it from the vaccine. So important. And as a follow-up, nobody's asked this question tonight, but I'm sure it's on some people's minds. We've heard a lot about COVID vaccine and fertility. What can you tell us about that?
So there's no documented link at all scientifically between the COVID vaccine and infertility. In the trials in the adults, they did not enroll pregnant women into the trials, but there were people that became pregnant during the trials. So I'm still very confused where this myth even came from, but I do completely consider it a myth. I've seen no scientific evidence. Other vaccines are very, we don't have that issue with any other vaccines, and I have no reason to be concerned about it at all.
Thank you. Dr. Creed, I know you can't answer for every single school district in the area, but what do you foresee this fall? In-person learning or a return to online learning? And if you do foresee more in-person learning, do you think that will lead to a surge in COVID cases?
So I do think likely we'll try to get back to in-person learning for most schools, and I think that will be really important for our kids, and they benefit a lot from being in person for school. I'm not expecting that to cause a big surge in cases. The nature of school is it's easier to keep things under control and kind of follow rules. We really weren't seeing a lot of outbreaks in from school exposures. It's more like social environments that it's more likely to spread. And it's really important that most of the teachers and faculty have been vaccinated. So like ideally everybody would be able to get their vaccine, and then we could go back in person. But overall, I think the benefits outweigh the risks, and I think the best option for our kids will be in person learning this fall. But like I said, I'm not sure what the regulations are going to be this fall. So
Thank you. Dr. Saltzman, one mom asked a very specific question. When my 8-year-olds are allowed to get the shot, will they have to have any tests done before getting the shot?
No, they will not. There's no reason to think they'll need a test done before they get the vaccine. We haven't done that with anybody in any of the other age groups, so there's no reason to feel that an 8-year-old would need such a test. I don't even know what test that would be.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, Dr. Giese, one mom is wondering about the Delta variant. What could you tell her about that?
So the Delta variant, so COVID there have been multiple variants kind of since the start of the pandemic in March 2020 that have predominated at different times and in different areas. And the Delta variant currently is the predominant strain, I believe, worldwide, and primarily, so it's at South America, Africa, and parts of Asia at this point. And it is the predominant strain in areas that are largely unvaccinated. It does seem to be more transmissible. But the most important part is that the vaccine seems to work against it quite well, like excellent.
Right. So that's really great news. It's not a huge deal here yet, might be, but we do know that those of us who are vaccinated, you're protected if you're vaccinated. So that's a great piece of news. All right. Dr. Creed, we have a question here. Came in from one of our attendees tonight on the webinar. We've been invited to a couple of weddings indoor this fall. My husband and I are vaccinated along with most of our family. However, at the weddings, we know a lot of people attending will not be vaccinated. What are your thoughts for our 5-year-old and 1-year-old, obviously not vaccinated because they're too young, attending such large indoor events with a mix of unvaccinated adults? We're getting pushback from extended family when we said we'd leave them with a trusted babysitter, saying we are being too cautious.
I think if it's an indoor crowded space, then it's not really the safest spot. So I don't think you're being too cautious. And hopefully other family members will see that. I really think they should only be going to a big indoor event if they are vaccinated. So
I would agree. In this case, I would just, in your mind, substitute the word measles for COVID. You know, half the people aren't vaccinated against measles. What happens? Well, it could be very, very dangerous. And would you bring your 5-year-old and 1-year-old to a place like that? Probably not. So this is one where you just have to stand up to your family, I guess. But I agree with Dr. Creed. It sounds a little risky. All right, Dr. Saltzman, we know that taking a vacation by car is an annual event for some families during the summer. I remember doing it as a child, and I've done it as a parent. Let me tell you, not too eager to get back in the car with my 4 kids. What tips do you have for families who plan to take a road trip this summer?
Great question. So the actual trip, I've done a few road trips already myself in the last year, and I would suggest bringing a mask and wearing it when you go indoors. You're going to see all variations of mask wearing and not mask wearing, depending on where you go. But if you want to be safe, it's probably a good idea to wear one when you're in indoor public places. I think a great destination that I've heard from a lot of patients, and I also did with my family, is to go somewhere in a not crowded place and rent a house and cook at home, and don't go to restaurants if that makes you feel uncomfortable. I know things are a little better now than they were last summer, but doing things where you're not going to be in large groups of people, particularly large groups of people indoor. Let's see what else. With regard to travel with kids, I brought this up in the past with other patients, is I think occupying their minds and their time so that you can drive successfully and not be distracted, making sure that you're bringing things that will hold their interest. Unfortunately, a lot of people do that with devices, but that's not the worst thing in the world when you travel. It's better than having very distracting kids when you're trying to pay attention to the road. I think bringing novel things that are new for children usually hold their attention more. Obviously depends on the age. Playing some games. I mean, this is pretty old fashioned, but we used to play, locating license plates, and everybody, I think, as whoever's had a child has played A for Apple, alphabet games, but getting creative and doing some things, even having sing-alongs, bringing music that everybody likes and giving everybody a chance to play something that they like. I think the thing to keep in mind in long trips is you still have to be safe. It gets pretty boring sometimes and people want to wander around a car. This isn't 1960 or 1970. We know that that's not a great idea. We have seatbelts, we use them. And I do tell breastfeeding moms that they should probably stop the car if they're going to have the child breastfeeding, because they may be in a seatbelt, but a breastfeeding child is not being restrained in a car seat during breastfeeding, unless they're super creative.
All right, well, thank you. And I must say it's now right about 7 o'clock. So we want to respect everyone's time. We're going to wrap this up. Again, there will be an email sent to everybody who registered for the event with this recording link on it. And if you haven't seen over on the chat, there are several links that were posted by us, linking to some of the things we've mentioned earlier, like our webinar previously about vaccines, and some of the links about bike safety and choosing a bike and whatnot, and just a link about COVID vaccines in general. So stay tuned. There will be another vaccine specific only webinar coming up in August before school starts. And just look on our website and pay attention to your emails, as we'll be sending out information about that, in the coming month or so. Thank you all, especially thanks to our panelists, Dr. Saltzman, Dr. Giese, and Dr. Creed. Thank you for your very wise answers tonight, and hope this was helpful for everyone. Have a very safe and healthy 4th of July weekend. Wear your sunscreen. Make sure you get your bug spray on, and hydrate, and enjoy the holiday. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.